there's Casey, Jackson County, and Clay and Platte counties. I can never get it in the right order. Our monthly meeting has an exciting action-packed agenda today that will be starred by our Election Administration Study readout. And we've got a couple of announcements right here at the top of the hour. So I'm going to share my screen here and I'm going to queue up, I believe it's Terry and Donna for our first announcement or announcements about Sunshine Law and Candidate Forum. Is that right?
Yes, Terry, do you have the image to come up?
Oh, she's got it. Yep,
okay,
there it
very
is.
good. We have been working hard on this, and please mark your calendars. Our speakers, Dave Helling, Steve Valkrot, and Max Couch, are so excited about doing this for the league and educating about that this is a foundational piece of democracy, knowing about the Sunshine Law and such. So when we met with them, it was very exciting, and I hope that you will go into the league and register. And we are inviting everyone across the state to come to this. And we've also are doing some legislative action on this because they have a bill that's passed before and got vetoed, Senate Bill 174, that is closing meetings and changing things. So you'll get more information about that later. So that's the one I wanted to talk about. And then,
Donna?
yes.
I think we want to ask people to do the same thing that we asked all of our observers, which is invite your local elected officials to come join us. Contact your anybody that, whether it's school boards or anything else. I think anybody who's an elected official would appreciate hearing about the Sunshine Law from this perspective. And we do have the recording from last year where we had Casey Lawrence from the Attorney General's office, Donna.
Yes, right.
Yes.
She's in charge of that. And friends and neighbors, put it on next door, help us out. Thank you.
And will this one be recorded for those of us who can't make it? I teach on Monday nights.
Yes,
Awesome.
It will be recorded.
Good, because this one's right up my alley and I am sad to have to miss that one.
Yeah, because we will have questions from the audience if you have anything.
Oh,
and
good.
Then Anitra, do you want to talk as they share about the forms? Well, I can't.
Go ahead. We have a full slate of forums with some date juggling, but you can go ahead. You're nice and clear, Donna. You go ahead and talk about it.
Well, the new thing is that we're getting guest moderators from radio and TV stations for this Kansas City Council meetings, and that we're doing 7 Kansas City Council meetings, as you'll see. And so all of you vote on the at large. So you vote on 1 in-person, in district, and the 6 at large. So please, if you can't make these dates, it will be recorded and placed on the league website. And then we are looking at the school boards, and we're covering Liberty, North Kansas City, Raytown, Hickman, and Grandview. And we're also doing the Raytown City Alderman. So we have expanded our coverage. We used to just do Hickman and Center and Kansas City, but now we're out there. And so don't be surprised if you aren't asked to help. And again, advertise this share on your Facebook, and
we'll have this ready to go out shortly. We have recently been asked by the Black Sorority AKA they would like to co-sponsor. So we're getting their logos in on all of our materials. That's what's holding this up. But we will have these to go out to libraries and other places with the QR code so that you can just use that QR code to ask a question. submit a question or to find where do I live? Do I live in a council district? So those should be going out hopefully Monday, these final materials. We just have to get the logos in.
Awesome.
And the South Kansas City Alliance is co-sponsoring Grandview and Hickman, and Raytown Chamber of Commerce is co-sponsoring the Raytown School Board and the Raytown Alderman. We are now being asked if people could co-sponsor with us, which I think is a real saying you have a good product.
Hmm.
And thanks to Anitra, who's done this for years and doing good.
Well, and we've had a co-chair team with Elizabeth Darr and Cheryl Barnes, who've worked with Anitra, and then Don and I have been tech support. So we've been meeting weekly or more since November.
This is an incredible amount of organization, team. So wow, impressive. So just make sure I understand this information will go out to the group soon. You will probably need help with making sure this goes off beautifully. And everybody should bring a friend and their favorite elected representative.
And it's all via Zoom.
All by Zoom. Okay, awesome. Well, that is great. Thank you so much for sharing that. My next announcement is, I believe, Mary. Mary, you had a little shout out you wanted to share.
Oh, well, I wanted you to share it. I hadn't planned on sharing it myself, but our very own Alice Kitchen has been inducted into the STARS Women's Hall of Fame at UMKC. And I read about it. It looks like, oh, there it is. She's down a ways in it because she was just this year inducted. And anyway, I just thought,
There she was.
yeah.
There.
Look at that. So she was inducted into the, what is it again? It's the
It's the
Star Women's
Stars,
Hall of
see up here in
Fame.
the corner, yeah, Star Women's Hall of Fame. And I think it was an honor, so I wanted to share it.
That's awesome. Okay, so I just want to read this because it's really exciting. So Alice Kitchen was appointed to the Stars Women Hall of Fame, which recognizes Kansas City women who have made our community a better place to live and preserves the history of their accomplishments. By sharing their stories, the Hall of Fame encourages and inspires women everywhere. That is our very own Alice Kitchen, everybody.
Yes. Heather, could you put that link in the chat so that we could look at that site later?
Please, yes, and it's there now. Awesome. Well, thank you for bringing that to our attention, Mary. Okay, the next one I believe is me. So I have to step down from my position as chair of the membership meeting planning committee, the committee that puts together these monthly meetings. And that, sorry, let me stop sharing my screen here. But that is in 90 days. So we've got 90 days to find someone awesome to hand off these responsibilities to. And the great news is we've done a lot of really good work to get organized and create a lot of resources and tools to make this as easy as possible for someone to step into the role. And I'm here to hand that off and train up anybody who would be interested in doing that. And the responsibilities basically include coordinating any announcements for the monthly meeting with the different committee leads, and arranging for the content that will feature. Sometimes that's awesome lead people sharing out the work that they're doing, or recruiting help for the big initiatives they're working on. Other times it's guest speakers or panels from outside of the league. The content varies month to month, but you get a lot of influence and autonomy to run that and set that up with your committee. And then the last part of the responsibilities is just leading that committee that helps put these meetings together. Great little group of folks. Please reach out to me or Ann or Janelle. Any of us would be happy to tell you about the role and what it entails, but would love to have you. And you're welcome to just come in and join one of our meetings and see if it's for you. So please consider that. Thanks for thinking of it. And just so you know, it's not because I hate the role. It's just because my job is changing a little bit. And so my time is shrinking and I won't have enough to give to it. And not that it's a huge time lift. I literally will have no time left. So please consider taking on this opportunity. Okay, and then the last thing that we have on the top part of this hour is Judy-Ann, who's gonna take us through the social media minute.
Yay. Thanks, Heather. We will miss your leadership on the team. But congrats to you with your work situation. So everyone, get out your phone, your whatever platform you're on your computer, and let's take a minute to do any or all of the following things. Number one, you can, if you're not on our Facebook page, if you're not on our Instagram account, but you're on Instagram, yep, Casey's on Instagram. Yep, I know you're a power user. Let me see, I'm getting the links here in the chat. Oops. Here we go. There's Instagram. LinkedIn, if you're on LinkedIn, if you can go to one of these links where our accounts are and follow or like, share, comment on any of the posts that you see. And we have one extra ask today specifically is we're trying to bulk up our YouTube channel. The more followers, the more subscribers you have to that, the more features you're able to use. So if everyone could take a moment and, oh, sorry. Yeah, this is the direct link up. Oh, okay. Ah, doesn't let you, I see. I'm used to taking off the HTTPS because that usually links, but not here, not on Zoom. Thank you, Heather. Okay. Yeah, you'll have to copy paste back, but thanks for the YouTube link. But if you are on LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or TikTok, we're there too. And yep, follow us if you're not. And let's splash a little bit of engagement right now, if you would, please. And share, you know, maybe find some other followers who would appreciate our information. We will be getting that post out there, for instance, about Alice Kitchen. You'll be able to share that. So thank you so much. I think that is the social media minute for this meeting.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And I think that's all for our top of the hour announcements. I'll just hold for a quick second to make sure we didn't miss anything important that folks need to know. Otherwise, I think we're going to move over to the Election Administration Study, the hot topic of our day.
Okay, great. That's my cue. Now I'm going to share my screen. Melanie, I can see you. If you could give a thumbs up if I share the right screen. How's it look? Okay.
Got it.
Great. All right. Well, thank you everybody for your time. And let's get right into it. So to begin with, what I'm going to do is give you a roadmap. And first, we will talk about the steps in our election administration study. And second, we'll show you a timeline. And third, we'll show you how we prepared this study. And before we plow into it, many thanks to the election administration teammates who have contributed, and Melanie Bussey, Laura Marcus Mountjoy, Stan Sexton, and Terry Payton. So the first step in the study are as follows. First, members learn about threats of violence and intimidation directed at voters and election workers. And then second, we will identify timely and relevant proposals. Those two first steps we'll do today. Then membership, which is you, will consider relevant consensus questions that will be used to develop positions, okay? So you'll hear about consensus questions. We are just exposing you to those questions today. You won't be deliberating those today. That'll be at 2 separate dates. And finally, membership will formally adopt positions that enable League of Women Voters of Kansas City advocacy of policies that defend and strengthen election administration. So here's our timeline. In December and January, we publish introductory e-voter primers. And those primers are accessible. They are on the League of Women Voters website under our positions. There's 5 of them. Then the February membership meeting, this is kind of like if you were looking at a map, and you are here. February membership meeting, educational presentation of study materials to membership. So today there will be about 35 minutes of presentation and about 50 minutes for Q&A. So lots of time for Q&A, but please hold your questions until after the presentation is done. And then remember how I talked about the consensus question meetings. There will be one Saturday, 10 o'clock in the morning on February the 23rd at the Waldo Library. There will be another on Tuesday, 7 p.m. on March 21st via Zoom. These are identical consensus questions. You do not need to go to 2. You should only go to 1. And finally, on September the 10th, on March 25th, this will be at the Westport branch of the Kansas City Public Library. This is where members will vote on positions. We will need 40 people present either virtually or presentially for us to have a position passed. Okay. Our Election Administration Study Committee has been working since last May on the broad theme of how elections are conducted. And since that time, we have narrowed our focus to 4 initial topics. 1, election worker intimidation. 2, election challengers. 3, voter intimidation and arms at the polls. And inside of this, there's 2 sub-themes. One is possible new restrictions, and the other is the use of existing law. And the 4th is early voting as a possible defense of election administration. Election administration is under high stress, both nationally and in Missouri. This is evidenced by turnover statistics and statements by election officials. We continually have reviewed relevant proposals. Now, while we prioritize threats of violence and election worker intimidation, we are also continuing our work in other areas that are important, including election venues, voter registration roll management, and the Missouri initiative process. Those will be considered by membership next year. The criteria we used to elevate an issue as an area of focus were the following. 1, where intimidation threatened election administration efficiency and ultimately the ability to vote. 2, where we saw relevant and timely legislation, either positive or negative, nationally or in Missouri. And 3rd, suggestions from interviewees in the criminal justice system or election administration and election experts. We were often surprised by suggestions that came from some of our interviewees who had impact on our study. So here's how our work and our presentation is organized. The study materials have 5 dimensions. First, we identify concerns. This is where we identify threats to election administration efficiency. The second is primers. These are accessible thematic documents for the layperson. Third, we identify existing and proposed legislation or procedures. And 4th, consensus questions to be considered by membership. And finally, possible positions, statements that could enable advocacy. All right, so now I'll turn it over to Melanie, who will talk about election worker intimidation.
Thank you. Some of you might recognize these poll workers at the January 6th hearing as they described racist intimidation and harassment. Ruby Freeman and her daughter, Wandria Moss, were election workers in Georgia, and both of them have left. Election authorities across the country are facing a growing concern. Election workers are leaving their jobs due to threats, harassment, and intimidation. References to election workers includes election officials and administrators, election judges, volunteers, and employees of an election authority. Doxing is the publishing of private or identifying information about an individual on the internet with malicious intent. Our concern is that the intimidation of election workers has become commonplace. This intimidation has the effect of diminishing the effectiveness of our election administration infrastructure, interfering with election integrity, and making it harder to retain and recruit election workers. The Brennan Center for Justice conducted a poll of election workers in March of 2022. The poll found that over half of those who responded were concerned about the safety of their colleagues. 1 in 4 were concerned about being assaulted on the job. 30% knew of one or more election workers who had left. 17% had been threatened because of their job as an election official. And 60% of officials were concerned that threats, harassment, and intimidation against local election officials will make it difficult to retain and recruit election workers. In election officials under attack, the Brennan Center for Justice and the Bipartisan Policy Center identified several key solutions to address threats against election workers. First, provide greater protection for election workers' personal information. And second, prioritize a process to coordinate swift investigation and, where appropriate, prosecution of those responsible for threats to election workers. Currently, Missouri has a minimal criminal penalty for violence or threats of violence related to elections. The current penalty is a Class 4 election offense, a misdemeanor, with a possible sentence of up to 1 year jail time and/or a fee of up to $2,000. But the law only comes into play if the action occurs at a registration site, a polling place, or a counting or verification location, and the action impedes or interferes with the registration, election, count, or verification. Missouri law does not address other types of threats or harassment to election workers that would provide greater protection for election workers' personal information, or mandatory reporting of threats or harassment, and where appropriate, prosecution of those responsible. Senate Bill 346, introduced in the current legislative session, modifies various provisions related to elections and broadens the protections for election workers by expanding the definition of threats and harassment and increasing the penalty for intimidation of an election worker or doxing of an election worker, a Class D felony. House Bill 781 adds dissemination of personal information of an election official or his or her family with the intent to harass, intimidate, or influence the performance of their duties to the list of Class 1 election offenses, a felony. A conviction could result in imprisonment of up to 5 years and a fine of $2,500 to $10,000 or both. Colorado's Election Official Protection Act, passed in 2022 with broad bipartisan support, is an example of model legislation reform. It made it unlawful to threaten, coerce, or intimidate an election worker and to disseminate or dox the personal information of an election worker. Maine also adopted revisions to its election laws, also with bipartisan support, that made it unlawful to intentionally interfere with an election official by force, violence, or intimidation, and directed Maine's Secretary of State to establish a process for reporting election-related threats to election officials. Our election workers are critical to the integrity of our elections. To protect our election administration infrastructure and to safeguard the integrity of our elections, we support measures in the following areas. 1, deterring those who would intimidate election workers. 2, imposing adequate criminal penalties. 3, tracking threats to and harassment of election workers. And 4, promoting criminal investigation of election worker intimidation. Consensus question 1. Election workers and officials are on the front lines of our democracy, there to ensure that local elections run smoothly and that every voter can make their voice heard. Threats and harassment faced by election workers and officials have been targeted at Democratic, Republican, and nonpartisan individuals alike, and have caused many election workers to resign their positions. Should the retention of dedicated election workers be a priority? Yes, no, why or why not? Question 2A. Some election offenses in Missouri are misdemeanors and others are felonies. For example, under House Bill 1878, soliciting an absentee ballot could be a felony offense. Threatening an act of violence with the intent of denying a person's lawful right to vote or to participate in the election process is also a felony. Should it be a felony offense to make threats against or harass an election worker in performance of the worker's duties or in retaliation for the performance of the election worker's duties? Yes, no, why or why not? Question 2B. Doxing someone's personal data is considered a misdemeanor offense in Missouri, except in the case of law enforcement officers and members of the judiciary, where the offense would be a felony. Should knowingly doxing the personal data of an election worker be an illegal felony offense? Yes, no, why or why not? And consensus question 3A. Election workers have reported that some of their reports of violent threats and harassment have been dismissed by local law enforcement. Some of their reports were trivialized, and some cases of threats were not investigated. Should local and state law enforcement agencies be required to provide training on the reporting and investigation of threats to and harassment of election workers? Yes, no, why or why not? And consensus question 3B. There is presently no policy for mandatory reporting of threats and harassment of election workers, and therefore the extent of the problem statewide is unknown. Should the Secretary of State be required to record and report threats to and harassment of election workers? Yes, no, why or why not? At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Laura Mountjoy, who will talk about election challengers.
Okay. In Missouri, poll challengers can make challenges to voter identification and are at the polls until the ballots have all been cast. While there's a role for election challengers in the voting process, challengers have become increasingly partisan and disruptive. This can create chaos for election workers and voters and leave voters open to frivolous and discriminatory challenges. Both Democrats and Republicans have long enlisted poll watchers and workers to oversee voting and planned ahead for disputes. But now officials are grappling with the prospect that those efforts may be driven by activists who spread fantastical or debunked theories. Even as courts and lawmakers have sought to curb parties' challenge efforts, independent groups of private citizens have pushed ahead. For example, in 2011, a Houston area organization called True the Vote announced its goal of recruiting 1 million people to serve as poll watchers during the 2012 general election. Another example, local activists challenged over 500 voters in Wake County, North Carolina, most of whom were voters of color. These examples highlight the kinds of problems that often occur when untrained private citizens seek to monitor access to the polls. The Brennan Center for Justice Voter Challengers issued findings of common practices that hinder election administration and open the process to abuse. 1, permitting challenges inside the polling place on election day. 2, challengers raising baseless allegations. Many voter challenges are based on inadequate or false information. And 3, protecting the right of a voter who is challenged. Policy recommendations suggested to prevent the abuse are not allowing election day challenges, requiring reliable evidence to substantiate a claim, and protecting the voter from baseless challenges. In our interview with KU law professor Mark Johnson, he noted that current Missouri law already contains provisions that provide some protections regarding interactions between challengers and voters and election judges. For example, by law, challengers cannot directly confront voters, and election judges are required to ask challengers engaging in improper conduct to cease the improper behavior or leave the polling place. Current legislation in Missouri provides that election judges have the power to remove challengers or watchers from polling places who interfere with the orderly process of voting, are guilty of misconduct or any violation of law, and fail to cease such interference. If disruptions continue, election authorities shall be notified who can take action deemed necessary. The police may be called to remove disruptive watchers or challengers from polling places or places where votes are being counted. What type of allegations can a challenger make in Missouri? Challenges may only be made when the challenger believes the election laws of the state have been or will be violated. How is the challenge made? Each challenger shall report any such belief to the election judges or to the election authority if not satisfied with the decision of the election judges. Legislation was proposed in Missouri in 2022 that would have removed the qualification that a challenger be a registered voter in the jurisdiction of the election authority for which the challenger is designated, and provided that an election official who obstructed the rights of a watcher or challenger could be guilty of a Class 3 election offense. The legislation didn't pass, but may be reintroduced this year in 2023. Positions. Election challengers should not inject themselves into the voting process and should not directly challenge voters. Challengers should only interact with election officials who should have the authority to remove disruptive challengers. Challengers should be registered voters of the election authority in which they operate in order to limit large-scale and targeted challenge efforts meant to gain partisan advantage. Consensus question 4. Missouri law currently has a qualification requiring that challengers be eligible voters in the relevant election jurisdiction. Should this qualification be retained? Yes, no, why or why not? Consensus question 5. Current Missouri law prohibits challengers from interacting directly with voters. Should election challengers continue to be prohibited from directly interacting with voters? Yes, no, why or why not? Consensus question 6. Missouri law currently requires election authorities to take action if a challenger improperly interacts with voters. Should election authorities retain the obligation to restrict improper activity of challengers? Yes, no, why or why not? And Stan will now give us information on voter intimidation, arms at the polls.
Stan, you're on mute.
Well, I couldn't play my guitar that way.
No.
Okay. So we now move to the topic of voter intimidation by the display of firearms at polling places and what prohibitions, if any, should be considered. Research establishes that firearms, especially assault rifles, are intimidating. And there seems to be no ostensible purpose in having people carry them to polling places. Interestingly, Missouri law prohibits the carrying of concealed firearms within 25 feet of a polling place, the same spatial restriction that exists for electioneering. But Missouri law does not prohibit the open carry of weapons within this 25-foot limit. If we look around the country, and especially at other states that have adopted the so-called constitutional carry, they prohibit firearms within certain distances of polling places, whether the firearm is concealed or open carry. In Georgia, that distance is 150 feet. In Florida, it's 100 feet. And in Louisiana, Texas, and Arizona, it's 75 feet. Now, Missouri law currently has a contradiction about the firearms as polling places, which you probably picked up from the prior slides. Concealed carry is prohibited within 25 feet of a polling place, but there's no such restriction for open carry. This was likely because constitutional carry was adopted after the concealed carry law was implemented. At a minimum, this discrepancy should be rectified. Now, there appears to be three possible positions. At a minimum, the discrepancy that exists between the 25-foot restriction and the lack of any restriction for open carry should be rectified by amendment to impose a common setback distance. All right, so this concludes mine. I think it's now back to you, Greg.
Okay. Here we've got just to follow up on so what Stan was talking about. Here's a possible position. Since 2016, there's been an increase in threats of violence directed at voters and election workers that have included the use of arms. These actions of intimidation infringe on the right to vote. Voters should not be subject to violence and intimidation as they vote and access voting sites. Voters should not be subject to violence and intimidation in the course of voting. The concealed and open carry of arms at the polls and within a set distance from the polling place should be prohibited. So here would be consensus question 7. Allowing the open and or concealed carry of firearms up to the front door of polling places increases the likelihood that voters at such polling places will be intimidated, especially if armed people number more than 1 or 2 and are dressed in tactical gear and militia insignia. Question: should the concealed and open carry of firearms within a set distance of polling places be prohibited? Yes, no, why, or why not? Okay, so now let's go to the topic of using existing law. In other words, what if we couldn't do anything with new legislation regarding arms? There are numerous Missouri statutes regarding voter intimidation and arms. Combined, these can be applied to regulating arms and threats of violence at the polls. However, some believe that First Amendment rights of free speech should be weighed against voting rights. An Everytown law primer argues that intimidating voters is illegal, including armed intimidation. The primer advocates for local officials to understand the law and to prevent and prepare for potential election interference, including by spreading the word that such conduct will not be tolerated. Everytown law cited how Virginia's Attorney General publicly announced prior to the 2020 elections, 1, that voter intimidation, including through the use of weapons, is illegal. 2, that brandishing weapons in a threatening manner is illegal. And 3, law prohibits arms on certain public places, including churches, schools, and public buildings. Missouri has similar laws in each of these categories. On First and Second Amendment rights, these are cited by arms proponents in cases of arms at the polls. But Everytown notes that even political speech, the core First Amendment activity, may be prohibited in and around entrances to polling places. Senate Bill 346, which is proposed this year, expands the zone of prohibited political speech from 25 feet to 75 feet. Everytown also highlighted a Texas court ruling which stated there is no constitutionally protected right to display a firearm in a public place in a manner that is calculated to alarm. We identified 3 relevant Missouri statutes that classify threats to use force to intimidate voters as misdemeanor election offenses. Here's the language of prohibited activity from 1. Inflicting or threatening to inflict any injury, damage, harm, or loss upon or against any person in order to induce or compel such person to vote or refrain from voting at any election. Regarding the use of arms, Missouri has law regarding brandishing weapons that were recently applied in the McCloskey case. It is illegal to exhibit in the presence of 1 or more persons any weapon readily capable of lethal use in an angry or threatening manner. Missouri also has laws that restrict unlawful militia. These were described in Georgetown Law's fact sheet on unlawful militias in Missouri. In our interviews with election administration experts and stakeholders, including the Office of the Jackson County Prosecutor, Professor Mark Johnson, and Everytown Law, the use of multiple existing statutes to address multiple scenarios of threats of violence at the polls was affirmed as valid. And let's go back to that spreading the word theme. In our interview with the Office of the Jackson County Prosecutor, we were asked if the League of Women Voters would support a public announcement by the Office of the Prosecutor where voters would be reassured that violence at the polls would not be tolerated. In our interview, Professor Mark Johnson emphasized the object of intimidation, the voter, determines whether intimidation occurs, and voters should be trained to report intimidation. Voter testimony was critical to the League of Women Voters' recent victory in the Arizona Dropbox case. So here's a possible position. Since 2016, there's been an increase in threats of violence directed at voters. These actions of intimidation infringe on the right to vote. The position would be voters should not be subject to violence and intimidation as they vote and access voting sites. Local, state, and federal law regarding voter and election worker intimidation should be enforced, with the right to vote without violence and intimidation having primacy as a fundamental citizen right. Public and private institutions that serve as polling places should be encouraged to have policies that deter voter intimidation and threats of violence. Penalties on those that intimidate voters should be sufficient to deter voter intimidation. We also affirm that voter intimidation is defined by those that are the object of intimidation, not by an intent to intimidate. So here are consensus questions on this topic. Consensus question 8. Missouri has laws that establish setback zones around polling places that protect voters from political speech and discourage intimidation. Should these setback zones be expanded to better ensure that voters are not subject to intimidation? Yes, no, why, or why not? Consensus question 9. Prosecution of voter intimidation cases requires voter engagement, including 1, the awareness that voter intimidation is illegal, 2, knowing that voter perspective on intimidation matters, and 3, voters reporting activity they see as intimidating. Question: should voters be made aware of their rights and encouraged to report acts of intimidation? Yes, no, why, or why not? Consensus question 10. Many believe that there is a need to balance First Amendment rights against voting rights. Should the League of Women Voters have a position that asserts the primacy of voting rights, rebutting the argument for unabridged First Amendment rights? Yes, no, why, or why not? Okay, let's move to our fourth subtopic, early voting. There's been a recent trend of increased activities that challenge both election workers and voters. These activities can diminish election administration efficiency and discourage voter participation. Whether intentional or not, these actions prey upon an election administration infrastructure that compresses voting into a 12-hour period. Here's one documented example involving election challengers. The challengers, including one from True the Vote, remember, this is the organization that Laura talked about earlier, they slowed voting to a crawl to the point that some students attempting to register and vote on the same day gave up and left. The 2013 publication, Early Voting, What Works, highlighted benefits of early voting. Prior to 2016, the most often cited plus of early voting was voter convenience. What's interesting about the Brennan piece is that it focused on the benefits to election administration when voting is not restricted to a 12-hour period. That piece was forward-looking in that it was written at a time when stress on election administration was lower than it is today. Here are some noted benefits. 4 of the 5 relate to an election administration efficiency and less stress on the infrastructure. Early voting as a possible defense of election administration was elevated in our study, post our interview with the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office. During that interview, without prompting, the office stated that an expanded early voting regime in Missouri would render election administration less vulnerable to threats of violence or disruption. With regard to proposed legislation, there are proposals that are both restrictive and expansive. On the more restrictive side, we noted if photo ID provisions from House Bill 1878 are struck, the 2-week period of early voting, no excuse absentee voting, will be invalidated. We also know that the Secretary of State has made statements opposing early voting. On the more expansive side, the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition has announced plans to advocate for expanding the no excuse absentee voting period, early voting, from 2 weeks to 6 weeks.
Your slides are not moving.
Can you see them now?
They're not moving.
They're moving for me.
Yeah, they're moving to me.
Okay.
Okay, they were, okay, sorry, they were not moving on mine, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're moving on mine.
Okay. All
Okay.
right. So on the more expansive, okay, we talked about the Missouri voter. On a more expansive national standard was in the Freedom to Vote Act. It proposed an early voting period of at least 15 days prior to the election and early voting hours for periods of no less than 10 hours. So here's a possible position. As a means of lessening the vulnerability of our election administration to efforts by those that use intimidation and excessive challengers to voters and election authorities, early advance voting should be available and include both days and hours that extend beyond standard business days and hours. So consensus question 11. Early voting periods are cited as a means of lessening the vulnerability of election administration to disruptive challengers and intimidation. Do the benefits of early voting to election administration offset incremental administrative burdens? Yes, no, why, or why not? Consensus questions 12A and 12B. Should the current early voting regime in Missouri be at minimum maintained and perhaps expanded? Why or not? Why not? And should the League of Women Voters support expanded early voting proposals, even if the proposal falls short of our goals? Yes, no, why, or why not? And, well, no, you have not completed the study, but you've completed the first part of the study. So now we are in a position now to take questions from our membership here. And I'm going to stop my screen. Well, I'm going to keep my, I'm going to stop my screen share so you can see everybody. Reva, you've got your hand up. Please proceed.
Yeah, Greg, was there any discussion of, and this may be a national federal question, of taking election day, the day of election, and just giving everybody that day off? Obviously, we have some people like essential, like firemen and police that can't, but for the general public, talking about making that a holiday.
Yeah, so that was something that was in the category of election venues. And so that's on our something that we are studying, and that election venues includes this notion of should it be a holiday, and how many, for example, what you see in Georgia, where they are actually restricting the number of sites, they're purging the number of sites, and then should they be on sites of access. So that goes into the election venues theme that is going to be for next year. But thank you for that. And again, to the extent that anybody sees materials, for example, Reva, if you see something on that topic, please forward that to us. And then our next question comes from Anne, and then we'll go to Donna. Anne?
I just wondered if you could repeat the dates of the 2 meetings that you're having prior to our meeting where we vote on this.
Yes, let me go back. And by the way, we're going to do all these things like having them on the calendar, and then have them have this presentation will be on our website. Hold on, I'm getting to that. I want to give the right date.
And we want you to give the right date.
Yes.
I see one of them's March 21st, I think, which is the day of a forum.
Nope. It's Saturday, February Saturday, February the 23rd, and the other is Tuesday, 7 p.m. on March 21st.
Saturday, February 23rd?
Should be the 25th, I think.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So that's Saturday. Yes. So we'll need.
What time, Greg?
That will be at 10 in the morning, and
Yeah.
that will be at the Waldo Library.
Okay.
And then the other one will be Saturday, March 21st. So we recognize that people can't be, at everyone, but you only have to go to one of the 2, just one of the 2.
So March what?
March 21st, Tuesday, 7 p.m. March 21st. Donna, did you have a question?
Yes, several, I guess. I'm correct that there's no guns in the polling places in Missouri?
Stan, take this one, because this gets back to one of these issues that there's a problem because of concealed and unconcealed. Stan, why don't you go ahead and take that one?
Yeah, there's a prohibition of carrying a firearm into a polling place. But then the next question is, well, is there a restriction like there is for electioneering, where there's a 25-foot setback? And the answer in Missouri law is yes, there is, but only with respect to concealed carry, with the following caveat. That concealed carry law is probably effectively rescinded by the constitutional carry that lets anybody carry without a permit. So there is no prohibition of someone open carrying a firearm, whether it be a long gun like an assault rifle or a handgun, right up to the front door, but they can't go in.
My other thing, because as we've done poll monitoring, like I was doing it at the high school, and they have their own security people there. And Missouri Voter Protection Coalition has been concerned about the sheriff or the police or someone being there in uniform, that might be intimidating. But it can be a little different when it's the normal security for the school, if you're using them as a polling place and all. And I wondered, in terms of our position, if some of the consequence would be that you couldn't use places where had their own security. Even the community center that I did poll monitoring had their security person type of thing, or whether people just feel safe because they know it's part of the normal business of that location.
There's an overarching law in Missouri. There's a statute that provides that all of the restrictions with respect to weapons do not apply to the police in the discharge, or to a security company in the discharge of their duties.
And Donna, there's another dimension to this, and that's the law. When they speak about security and the police, it allows it, and in fact, it invokes the importance of the election authority calling in the police. Okay, so if the police is there and the election officials have not requested it, that's a problem, and that's something that Missouri voter protectors should be concerned about. However, if the police are there at the request, okay, at the request of the election authority, okay, then it's okay, and that's part of the law. And yeah, and let me wrap this up, and then is that this was actually a case in Hickman Mills where the election board actually said, yes, we can, let's work it out where we can have security there in order to deal with it. In other words, the school wasn't just unilaterally putting the police there. The school was doing that in concert with the election authority. And that's actually how it should go. But the law always talks about the election authority's involvement in calling out the police.
Well, and I know down in Springfield that at the election, I don't know whether the sheriff just thought he would do it because he was afraid, or whether the election authority asked them. Anyway, there was a compromise that when the Missouri Voter Coalition, asked that they put them in, they weren't in uniform. They were in street clothes, but they were there at the election polls type of thing. But that was because of some, working something out. And when this started, I'll just say, because we've thought about this study for a while, I thought we'd be working on full funding for elections, because the election boards are, running short on funds, and it's interesting how we've shifted into safety.
Well, that was actually one of the things that was the surprise as we began our work on this. We had so many people, so it just kept coming at us. This whole notion of election worker stress, intimidation. It's a sign of the times, and that was combined with the absolute lack of anything in terms of any positions that dealt with this theme. And I'm not faulting anybody. It's just that the world changed in 2016.
It changed. In 2010, when Cheryl and I co-chaired the no excuse absentee voting or early, all the studies were talking about its convenience, its convenience, its convenience. And now I loved your example that how it helps the smoother running of elections, because lowering the stress and giving that more time. So yeah, Good
Well,
job.
thanks.
Wonderful program.
Well, thank you for the kind words, Donna. So let's go to Mary Lindsay and then to Joe Holt.
Well, I want to express my kind words too about it. This is really fantastic, and thanks Greg and team for doing it. My concern is about the setbacks. And I mean, for complicated things like ballot issues, having an opportunity to really talk to voters as they're heading to the polls, have a handout to explain, especially we know how deceptive they often can be in how, well, we'll go into that in detail. But people really do need to be educated as they walk in, because otherwise many, many people are not going to be exposed to whatever education is done more formally before that. And so was I right to infer that whatever the setback would be for guns would be the same as for electioneering?
No, not necessarily. I mean, it could be 100 feet for weapons and 25 feet for electioneering.
Okay.
I mean, it survives an equal protection of the law argument that there's a rational basis to distinguish between the two.
Good. I'm comforted. Thank you.
All right, Joe, Jackson County Election Board Observer.
Once again, I just want to say, great work. This is so interesting. And I don't want to sound whiny about this, but do we really need poll watchers, the people who stand next to the judges or wherever they stand and watch every move that they make? What is the point of that? I think as long as they are there, there will be the opportunity to slow things down. And I don't know. I worked in my career. Most of you have probably worked in your careers without somebody standing right next to me watching to make sure that I did my job right.
So Melanie and Laura, you both worked on this, and I remember at some point you said somewhere, there are some valid reasons for this. So could the valid reason that was cited, if that could be discussed?
Go for it, Melanie.
No, I was going to say I'm having some technical issues with mine, but let me.
We hear you loud and clear.
Okay. So there were the studies have shown, and it goes way back that watchers and challengers are just part of the process, and that they should be to give people, to let people know that things are being carried out the way they want them to be seen. I can understand, Joe, what you were saying is that why are they there? Because it can be disruptive. But the reason that there is for even like us to watch over the process, to make sure the process runs right. And Laura, weren't you and Dave watchers last year? Haven't you guys?
Dave and I have done the poll watching through the election protection, and you're not allowed. You don't go inside. You're only there if people need your help. I mean, Dave and I worked the actual polls, but Dave, you might correct me, we were considered election judges. They had to come to us after coming in, showing their ID. Then they were given a white slip, and they brought that over to us, and that showed us which precinct and ward where we were. We had 2 different ballots, and we had to make sure we gave them the correct ballot.
Judge.
So there was to follow up on this. There's election challengers, and then there's election watchers. And in Missouri, and this is something that is completely different from what Missouri Voter Protection Coalition does, and that what Missouri Voter Protection does is outside the polls. But these are people that are in Missouri. There's Missouri law that speaks specifically to both of those and how they are chosen. Usually it's affiliated with a political party. The other thing is the history of this, Joe, is that a lot of these election workers or election challengers and election, let's call them monitors, in all across the South, a lot of that was something that came into play during the civil rights days in around 1960s, 1970s. So they had their use then. Now, what's happened lately is how it's become a tool, as Laura and Melanie discussed in their presentation. And what was a source of concern for us was legislation that was proposed in 2022 by the Missouri legislature that would have allowed for people outside of the jurisdiction to come in. And that would have played into the hands of people like True the Vote. And then finally, when we had that interview with Professor Mark Johnson, he said, boy, look, Missouri has a really good law here. You have got to defend this thing.
Yeah, and when in personal experience, Marlboro Community Center, Jonda was turning in a complaint about not helping a curbside voter, and there was a Democratic election watcher there, and they go through a process to get to be a watcher. I mean, it isn't just you can walk in and do it. There is like he says in the law, there is a process and all, but she came out and was very supportive of us working to get this person the curbside voting. And I don't know that they had a lot of challenges. Missouri is trying to take care of problems that don't exist. They've got a solution without a problem, and that was a lot of what came out in the bill that passed last year.
All right, great comments. So we got Cindy and then Stacy, and I thought I saw Mary Ann's hand up, but let's go to Cindy and Stacy.
I have a quick question, and thanks to all of you for your great work. The meeting at the Waldo Library, is that the 23rd, which is a Thursday, or the 25th?
It's the 25th, and the League of Women Voters calendar has it right.
Okay, thank you.
All right, let's go to Stacy Webb.
The meeting at the Waldo Library is February 25th. Because then we also have a meeting on March 25th, but that will be at the Westport Library.
Right. Consult the League of Women Voters calendar, not Greg Whittam's.
As we say, go to lwvkc.org. Everything is on the website.
Stacy Webb.
Hi, yes. First off, kudos to you all. Such a great job. And then second, I know that I'm preaching to the choir on this point, but it is important to keep top of mind that police can be intimidating to some people. And I know the street close from Springfield, that is a seemingly good solution. I don't know, there could be other issues with it, but at first glance, it seems like a good solution. But what my first question was, my real question is, I do know that weapons differ, but how far does a bullet travel? I'm thinking that should be the distance for, having guns. Again, I know that different weapons have different, and I know nothing about guns. So, but that's the feat that I think we should be concerned about. And then a couple of other things. I could be wrong about this, but when we were talking about, you guys started the research about funding, and now my understanding is that not only has funding been reduced, but the new law is that they cannot obtain outside funding. Is that correct? I see shaking of heads. So that is definitely something. And then lastly, we might be able to use this for a branding opportunity in providing signage with our, a signage about what is, we were talking about, somebody mentioned that people have to know what is legal and that kind of thing, what their rights are. And so putting signs out makes sense, will cost a lot of money, but good branding effort. And that's all for me. Thanks.
Yeah. So Stacy, wonderful comments here. Let me comment on two things. One will be branding, and then the other one is this whole notion of funding. Okay. So if I forget, remind me. So on the branding, the whole idea of educating the public about voter intimidation is so important, and that came out. And if you again go back to what happened in Arizona, the Dropbox case,
Yeah.
the League of Women Voters won that case because they were able to have a voter provide very good testimony. It wasn't because the League of Women Voters was able to enunciate something. It's not up to somebody else. It has to be up to the voter. And so part of what we are talking about here is, to what extent do we educate voters about this? Then going back to the funding, Stacy, you're absolutely correct that House Bill 1878 prohibited outside funds. And so that presents a constraint. Now, I do know that the Kansas City Election Board was able to get, let's say, an 18% increase in their budget, but that's not always guaranteed. Fortunately, the League of Women Voters already has a position that endorses adequate funding of election administration. So that's something we can already rely on. Okay.
By the way, a 9mm bullet can travel 2.5 to 3 miles. So you can't effectively put it in that way. Somebody could be driving by within a 2-mile radius, but yeah, bullets travel a long way. And amazingly,
I thought so, but yeah.
Bullets fired in the air eventually land somewhere as well.
Yeah.
Which people don't realize or don't think about.
Mary Ann, you had your hand up.
Well, it's kind of just a unnecessary detail maybe, but I just wanted to say that when we were at the Marlboro Community Center where Donna was referring, people came up and asked us, what kind of an ID do I have to have? Or am I at the right polling place? Or, I mean, there were kind of just a lot of ambient questions that I think people felt they wanted to be reassured that somebody could tell them what was going on. And about that guy that couldn't get out of his truck because he was disabled and couldn't find a part, they didn't want to bring the ballot out to him. It really was good that we were out there because we saw him pull up and we were kind of aware of what was going on. So I think having those watchers out there is not such a, I mean, I think it is a good thing to do because there's a certain perspective you get from that viewpoint that you wouldn't get otherwise. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Any other questions?
And we are talking about two different things. Watchers inside the polling places, what are the challengers, and then the poll monitors that is through the election production.
We were outside the limit line. We never went into the polling place.
And you did a good job.
Thank you, Don.
All right, Mary Lindsay. Mary, you're on mute.
This is going back to earlier, but I do not see the Sunshine Celebration on the League website for this coming Monday. I mean, and maybe
it's March 13th.
Yeah, not February.
March 13th. Oh my gosh. Okay, thank you.
March Sunshine Week is the 12th to the 18th, and our
Okay.
presentations the 13th, March 13th.
Okay, then I will be there.
All right, other election administration questions here. All right, thank you so much for all of your interest and your wonderful questions. So now, number one, I'm going to be working with Pat Goodwin in getting this presentation up on our website, where we will also have all of the primers, where we already actually have all of the primers. And believe me, those primers were there because we thought they were really good, accessible materials. So so check those out. So that's number one. Number two is when we have the consensus meetings, okay, that will be on that Saturday in February, Saturday, February the 25th. I got it right this time, at 10 a.m. at Waldo. And then the other one in March, late March, on Zoom. It can really be helpful if you already have thought about what your answers are going to be. And the reason this is important is that, you know, Stan and Melanie and Laura and Terry Payton and I, we've worked together, but we will not be writing the positions or the consensus. The consensus can only be written by membership. So so we will need, your input is needed. This is something that membership does. So anyway, think about that. We will also have the consensus questions in a separate document posted on the website. So and then finally, if anybody has any questions about this leading up to those days, please reach out to me or any other member of the Election Administration Study Committee. So with that, I will hand it back over to Ann.
Oh, I think to Heather, actually.
Back to Heather.
Hello, hello, hello. Okay, so I think that brings us to the end of the line. I believe we have no further content unless somebody has any announcements, news, or other information they'd like to share before we go. But otherwise, I think this is a wrap.
Okay, I think Cheryl has her hand up. Did she?
I can't see it.
Probably wants to talk about state convention, I'm guessing.
Okay. Oh,
But
there you
you're
are.
on mute.
Okay, is this better?
Yep. Can hear
Yes,
you.
and Ann is exactly correct. I just mark your date. The first Saturday in May is a state convention in Columbia, and I'm on the planning committee for this. And so far, anyway, we're planning it to be only in person because there's so many votes that are going to be done. We decided to go old-fashioned and have it in person only. This might change, but for right now, mark your calendars. And if you want to, we're thinking about entertainment that Friday evening for those who come to stay the night. But it's going to be a jam-packed calendar. So
can you give us the hours of that day?
I think it's going to be the normal 9 a.m. social, you know, starting at 9 a.m. social time, 9 to 9:30, and then start in with the day and then go into around 3:30.
And it's in Columbia.
It's in Columbia, and we're still in the early planning of this, but the thought is to duplicate what was done several years ago and have by Zoom presentations in the days going up to that. That's Zoom only, like different, for example, let's say Greg were to do something on the study. So different areas of interest. I'm not saying that would be one of them, but we're still working on that idea.
So if Columbia wanted us to concur with their local control study, they might do a presentation earlier.
Exactly. I'm
in
not
the
saying
past,
they will, but these are the ideas.
in
Pardon?
the past, and you're looking at the history person for a
Mhm.
convention was like a weekend event. We got down and had something on Friday night, and we had meetings Saturday. We had a big banquet, and then finished up on Sunday, but they're now trying to do it in one day. Is that what you're saying?
And that's why we're thinking of doing the virtual Zoom meetings or presentations would be a better way of putting it, in the weeks, like say starting on Tuesday or Wednesday in the evenings, to make it more accessible to people.
And we will have voting delegates, but we can also have observers. Is that correct?
Yeah, we
That's
need 11 delegates.
Mhm. And I'm not one of the 11. I'll be there as the state person.
And we can carpool and have fun.
That's right. You got it.
Are you committing to going, Donna? Is that what I'm
Well,
hearing?
look at my calendar.
Because I'm going, so I'm happy to ride down with you.
She knows I have a heavy foot.
Yep, dibs on riding with Donna.
She has a pass.
Cheryl,
with
is there
control.
is there a number of people, a percentage of the members you need to vote on these items?
Yes, and I cannot tell you now what that is. I'll be honest.
And so if you don't get that number, what will you do? Because this is only in person.
We are assuming at the moment that we will have that number, but that is an issue that's under discussion. I'll put it that way.
And I'm sure if all the assigned delegates per league make it there,
Yes,
you have the appropriate number
that's correct.
and the percentage of the assigned delegates.
Mhm.
What was
I
the
would
date?
just put in a plug for going to a state meeting. You know, I've been in the league 50 years and I've only been to one national convention and you know, 3 or 4 maybe state conventions, but I really find them interesting. And now we're doing a condensed version, but you learn a lot and you meet
Mhm.
people from across the state. And as you know, the reason I've stayed in the league all this time is because I'm meeting very intelligent people that I like talking to. And you'll do that across the state too. So it's a good learning experience.
It's a very social thing. It is the first Saturday in May. I think that's the 6th, but I'm not looking at the calendar at the moment. Terry Lane had that question, but it is the first Saturday. We were trying to figure out to juggle not interfering with Mother's Day weekend, graduation, all that. So
Donna, when you mentioned that the delegates from every league chapter are going to be there, are the number of delegates based on their membership number?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
yes,
I think every league gets 2, even if they only have a small number, like the president and a delegate or something. I've never been in charge of that, but yeah. Because we have a nice number of members.
yes.
Because, you know, we didn't have that many before COVID or before
Mhm.
2016. So, you know, this
We're
will be
only
great.
surpassed by St. Louis. So in the number of delegates Kansas City League has, but it was thought, since we're compressing it to one day, that it would be better to go back to pre-COVID. We're also interested and involved with Zoom like today, which is a wonderful invention, if you will. But we decided to go back in person, and partly was because of issues with voting, registering voting. The US convention had everybody use their cell phones, whether they're in person or not. And it was decided just to simplify things, to make it in person like it was going up to only 3 years ago.
I have an answer about quorum. I have an answer for Rita's question, which is that the quorum shall consist of registered delegates, at least one delegate from a majority of local leagues, and local league delegates must outnumber the LWVMO board delegates by at least 1. So not a big quorum.
Yeah. Well, we weren't concerned about it. I know that. So.
Well, I don't know. And I guess I'm not on mute. I really am disappointed that it's that way, because I imagine there could be many people across the state who would want to be a part of it. But I mean, my gosh, I mean, Columbia is pretty much the middle of the state, but it still entails a lot of driving for most people. And so I'm disappointed to hear that that's how it's going to be done.
Well, we had discussion about it, and it was pointed out until before COVID, that's how they all were. So, and people came for 4 days, so.
One might argue, though, that was partly due to a lack of technology that we have now.
That's true.
We didn't have any choice then.
Yeah. And as everybody who's ever planned anything knows, sometimes things change. But for the moment, that's how it is.
Well, I think reading the room, the feedback from Kansas City is we'd prefer hybrid.
Yes. I understand that.
We could still try to get delegates to go, but yeah, hybrid.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Opens it up for more transparency.
Mm-hmm. The one thing about being in person is what Donna has said, and I've said too, is that it really leads to personal interaction that you don't get on the Zoom call.
And I'll just give a little plug for what Cheryl's been doing, and maybe you all know about it already, but the member at large unit up St. Joe Way is making some good progress. So we may get some more help on this side of the state to influence legislators,
yes,
and educate people.
They're reaching out their goal is to reach out up to 9 counties surrounding them. So they're really delving into the rural Missouri counties, not just in St. Joe itself. So they're really a firebrand. Their next step is to obtain their 501c3, which takes a while.
So Cheryl, this is Terry, and I was just saying, I've been to a lot of in-person league events, particularly when I was in Wisconsin, and I know the value of that. But in our effort to be very DEI conscious, and being welcoming to diversity in age and everything else, we have a lot of women and men who are employed and flying all over the country, and Zoom allows them to participate if they're not here locally. So I just think in terms of being welcoming to all of our expanded membership, that Zoom, a hybrid, really adds to that. And just consider that.
Well, believe me, I brought this up. I said, I'm just positive people in the Kansas City League are not going to be happy if it's just in person. And I said, I totally agree with that. But right now, it's the decision, let's put it this way, it's the decision that was made. I think part of it, or a lot of it, has to do with available technology and availability of people to do that. So,
Cheryl, and although you learn a lot, only the delegates get to vote. So,
pardon?
I said, although you learn a lot at the convention, you can observe it, but only delegates vote.
Sure. Well, so Cheryl, would you be willing to pass along our feedback and request?
I'm already typing out an email to Marilyn.
Awesome, you're the best. Yeah, I mean, we have these accessibility and inclusion concerns, which are more than just convenience. That's actual getting people to participate in the democratic process and what we're doing.
A lot of the discussion about where it was going to be held. because as it's pointed out by some people on our planning committee that Amtrak goes through Jeff City, which is a possible site, but not Columbia. But the cost and availability of places to have it in Jeff City, it was just too much. So we ended up going back to Disciples of Christ Christian church that has hosted league events in the past. And the hotels that were considered, it was just egregious. The costs involved, it was crazy. It was like literally at least 20 times the cost that the church is having. So, or, you know.
I'm sure though, Cheryl, with COVID, a lot of churches now have the ability to do hybrid events. So
they've had
yeah.
it before, this particular one. I've been there both at this particular church in Columbia, both as a member of the league, and I belong to that same denomination. So I was there in the past for training. So yes, I think there's probably a lot of there could be available spaces to be able to do hybrid that might be affordable. It's not just whether something a space can do hybrid, because like you say, that's not that hard to find now. The point was how to register correct and timely voting, because there'll be a lot of voting. This is a governmental issue, if you want to look at it that way, if that's the correct term. So.
Well, but only delegates vote. So maybe the delegates have to be in person, but it could still be hybrid so others could watch the procedures.
Are the votes secret votes? Are they cast secretly?
They're casted.
Yes, I mean they're written. They're not hand raises. They are
right.
You have a convention. You have a credentials committee that you have to show that you are the delegate for which league. You have a committee that counts and registers the votes because you're electing state officers. You're voting on recommended program and etc. So there, and then you have a resolutions committee, and in the past, I assume maybe they're having all those again, type thing. But yeah, I've been on 2 of those committees, and you have to report.
Let's put it this way. There's 5 pages of instructions for how to plan this sort of thing, a convention. So. But I will take everybody's concerns back. I'm not surprised. So.
Thank you
for doing that. Appreciate it. Okay. Anything else that we need to cover today? We're a little bit over time. So at least I think we are. Is that right? Yes. Okay.
Just a few minutes.
Yeah. Awesome. Laura?
Yeah, I don't know if Donna saw my chat to her, but I looked on the website and the Sunshine Forum is not listed under any of the 3 calendar sections on the website. So you just might want to
Yes,
check that out.
we know, we just finished up the imaging and everything. It is on our Facebook. It is a Facebook event, but we had to finish things up with all of our speakers before we could get it on the website.
Great. I know.
You get to be the first to see it. You saw it
Yeah.
today, and
Yeah.
Pat will help us get that up and going on the calendar, I'm sure. So we're coming, Pat. We're coming. Thank you for checking that though, because it's going to be exciting, guys. When you hear Dave Helling and Steve Vockrodt, they say is the nerd of open meeting laws, that he really knows things. So
they were a lot of fun to chat with, and many thanks to Nancy Shaver and Evelyn Maddox, who did the planning. Nancy got all the speakers, so that was exciting.
well, you all enjoy this cold weather while I'm in Arizona.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for that, Donna.
All right.
Okay. Everybody, thank you so much for making time on your Saturday morning to talk League of Women Voters. Thank you to the Election Administration Study Group for all your hard work there and educating us on that. Everybody have a great weekend. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
It's gonna be
You
50
too.
tomorrow.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.